Welcome to the Lost in Disclosure. Chapter 1. A Night Without Stars. There are nights on the ocean when the world feels like it has ended. Not in violence, not in sound, but in stillness so complete that the boundary between water and sky dissolves into a single, endless dark. The stars above mirror themselves below, and for a moment you forget which way is up. This is the kind of night fishermen know well, the kind that makes you speak in whispers, if you speak at all. It was on such a night, sometime in the late 1970s off the coast of Cebu in the Philippines, that a small crew of fishermen sat in their wooden boat, nets cast, waiting for the catch. The engine had been cut hours before. There was no wind, no waves, just the gentle rocking of the hull and the occasional creak of rope against wood. One of them, an older man named Ernesto, later said it felt like the ocean was holding its breath. And then, beneath them, something began to glow. At first it was faint, a pale shimmer like moonlight filtered through deep water. Ernesto thought it might be plankton, bioluminescence stirred by the movement of their boat. But the light didn't fade. It grew, brighter. The other men noticed it too. They stood, leaning over the edge, peering down into the black. The glow wasn't diffuse. It had shape. It had edges, and it was moving. Slowly, steadily, the light rose toward them. Ernesto would later describe it as a sphere, or several spheres impossible to count, each one pulsing softly, shifting from pale blue to green to something almost white. They moved in formation, circling the boat in a slow, deliberate arc. There was no sound, no bubbles, no disturbance in the water. Just light, moving with purpose. The youngest among them, a boy of 16, asked if they should pull up the nets and start the engine, but no one moved. They stood there, transfixed, as the lights continued their silent dance beneath the hull. And then, all at once, they stopped. For a moment, the ocean was darker than it had been before, darker than it should have been, and then the lights flared, a brilliant white flash that turned night to day, and vanished. The engine died, the compass spun uselessly, and the men were left in silence once more, staring at the water, wondering if they had just seen something from the deep, or something from beyond it. Chapter 2. The Ocean That Watches Back. Humanity has always looked to the stars when searching for the unknown. We build telescopes, send satellites into the void, and scan distant galaxies for signs of life. But we forget that our own planet holds mysteries just as profound and far closer than we think. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface. It contains 95% of the biosphere. And yet we have explored less than 5% of it. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of our own seas. This should unsettle us, because the ocean is not empty. It is alive, teeming with life forms strange and ancient, creatures that have evolved in darkness, under pressures that would crush steel, in temperatures near freezing or scalding hot.
Life thrives where we assumed it could not. And if life can adapt to such extremes, what else might exist in those untouched depths? For as long as humans have sailed, they have reported lights in the water. The ancient Greeks spoke of phosphorescent waves that glowed like fire. Sailors in the age of exploration wrote of entire stretches of ocean that shimmered with pale green light, as if the sea itself were alive. In the 19th century, naval officers documented what they called milky seas, vast areas where bioluminescent bacteria turned the water into a luminous expanse stretching for miles. Science has explanations for many of these phenomena. Bioluminescence, light produced by living organisms, is well understood. Dinoflagellates, jellyfish, squid, and deep sea fish all generate their own glow through chemical reactions. It is one of nature's most elegant survival tools, a way to attract prey, confuse predators, or communicate in the dark. But not all lights fit this explanation. Some are too large, too bright, too organized. In 1963, the crew of the SS Tynwald, a passenger ship crossing the Indian Ocean, reported seeing massive wheels of light rotating beneath their vessel. The lights formed perfect geometric patterns, spokes radiating from a central hub, and spun slowly, illuminating the water in pulses. The phenomenon lasted for several minutes before fading into the depths. Similar wheel formations have been reported dozens of times, always in deep water, always at night. Scientists have theorized that these might be schools of bioluminescent plankton disturbed by underwater currents or seismic activity. But witnesses insist the movements are too precise, too symmetrical to be random. And then there are the cases that defy all comfortable explanations. Lights that follow ships for hours. Lights that rise from the seabed and pace vessels at exact speeds. Lights that seem to respond to the presence of humans, approaching when called, retreating when pursued. Lights that, by all accounts, behave as if they are aware. The ocean, it seems, does more than reflect the stars. Sometimes it watches back.
Chapter 3. The Fisherman of Cebu. Ernesto Cabrera was 53 years old the night he saw the lights. He had been fishing the waters off Cebu since he was a boy, learned the trade from his father, who learned it from his. He knew the tides, the reefs, the places where fish gathered in the dark. He knew the ocean the way some men know prayer. And he knew when something was wrong. It was August, late in the month, during the season when the seas were calm and the fishing was good. Ernesto and his crew, his brother Miguel, a cousin named Ruben, and the boy Tomas, had set out just after sunset, intending to fish through the night and return at dawn. They drifted about 5 kilometers offshore in water deep enough that you couldn't see the bottom even in daylight. The nets were down, the lanterns were dim, and for the first few hours everything was as it should be. Then the light appeared. Ernesto noticed it first, a faint glow beneath the boat, diffused at first, like the beam of a flashlight filtering up through murky water. He leaned over the side, squinting, trying to make sense of it. "Plankton?" Miguel asked. "Maybe," Ernesto said, but he didn't believe it. The glow grew stronger, and as it did, it began to take shape. Not one light, but several. distinct spheres, each about the size of a basketball, hanging suspended in the water below them. They pulsed gently, rhythmically, shifting in color from pale blue to green to a soft, almost white luminescence. Reuben crossed himself. Thomas stared wide-eyed, gripping the edge of the boat. The lights began to move. They circled the boat slowly, methodically, maintaining a consistent depth, maybe 10 meters down, Ernesto guessed. There was no disturbance in the water, no sound, no trail of bubbles, just smooth, silent motion. "Should we pull up the nets?" Tomas whispered. Ernesto didn't answer. He couldn't look away. The lights continued their orbit, completing one full rotation, then another, and then, as if following some unseen signal, they broke formation. One moved toward the bow, another drifted toward the stern, a third descended deeper, fading slightly before rising again. They were, Ernesto realized, examining the boat. Miguel said something in Cebuano, a prayer maybe, or a curse. Ernesto couldn't tell. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was something else. Awe, perhaps, or the weight of witnessing something that should not exist. And then the lights stopped moving. They hung there, perfectly still, arranged in a rough triangle beneath the boat. For a long moment, nothing happened. The men held their breath. And then the lights flared. It was sudden, blinding, a burst of white so intense that Ernesto threw his arm over his eyes. He felt heat on his skin, heard Tomas cry out, and then darkness. Not the darkness of night, but the complete absence of light. The lanterns had gone out. The small battery-powered radio they kept on board was silent, and when Ernesto tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. They sat there, rocking gently in the black, listening to their own breathing. After what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a minute or two, the stars reappeared overhead. The compass, which had been spinning wildly, settled back to north. And when Ernesto tried the engine again, it started without hesitation. The lights were gone. They pulled up their nets in silence, started the engine, and headed back to shore. No one spoke. When they reached the dock just before dawn, they tied off the boat, unloaded their meager catch, and went their separate ways. It wasn't until 3 days later, over drinks at a small bar near the harbor, that Ernesto finally told the story aloud. Ernesto, Miguel, and Reuben were there. Tomas, too. And as Ernesto spoke, he realized something. They had all seen the same thing. Every detail matched. The colors, the movements, the flash. Whatever had been beneath their boat that night, it had been real. Chapter 4. Whispers from Other Shores. Ernesto's story might have faded into local legend, another fisherman's tale embellished with time, if not for one detail. He was not alone. Across the world, in waters cold and warm, shallow and deep, other witnesses have reported nearly identical encounters. The accounts span decades, even centuries, yet they share a disturbing consistency. In 1966, off the coast of Norway, a fishing trawler called the Fjord Bris was returning to port after a successful cod run. The crew was tired, the hold was full, and the night was clear. Around 2 a.m., the captain, Bjorn Halderson, noticed a glow in the water off the starboard side. At first, he assumed it was the reflection of the ship's lights, but the glow persisted, even grew brighter as they moved away from it. Curious, Halderson slowed the engines and brought the ship around. What he saw, he later told reporters, was like nothing he had ever seen in 30 years at sea. Beneath the surface, maybe 20 meters down, was a luminous disk, roughly circular, with a slightly domed top. It was pale yellow, almost cream-colored, and it pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. The disk moved parallel to the ship, matching its speed exactly as if tethered to it by some invisible line. Halderson radioed the Coast Guard. By the time they responded, the light had descended further and disappeared into the depths. Sonar readings taken later that night showed no unusual underwater formations, no large marine life, no geological anomalies. Just empty water. A similar case occurred in 1978 off the coast of Chile. A group of fishermen near Valparaiso reported a formation of lights that rose from the seabed during a nighttime catch. The lights, described as orbs of soft white and green, ascended slowly, hovered beneath their boats for several minutes, and then shot upward, breaking the surface and disappearing into the sky. Local authorities dismissed the report, but one detail caught the attention of investigators. Every compass and radio aboard the 3 boats involved had malfunctioned during the encounter. The equipment functioned normally afterward. Then there's the case from Japan, documented in 1981 by the crew of a commercial trawler operating in the Sea of Japan. The captain, Kenji Watanabe, described seeing a river of light beneath his ship, a continuous, glowing stream that stretched for hundreds of meters. The light pulsed in waves, moving from stern to bow as if flowing through the water itself. Watanabe shut down the engines and drifted, watching. The light continued for nearly 10 minutes before abruptly vanishing. When he restarted the engines, the electrical system surged, blowing several fuses. Marine biologists suggested the lights might have been caused by bioluminescent plankton disturbed by underwater currents, but Watanabe rejected this. The movement, he said, was too deliberate, too controlled. It was not alive in the way we understand life, but it was not dead either. These stories, and dozens more like them, share certain features. The lights appear at night, usually in deep water. They move with apparent intelligence, often in formations or patterns. They react to the presence of humans approaching or following vessels. And they frequently coincide with electrical disturbances. Dead engines, malfunctioning compasses, radio static, or complete blackouts. Skeptics argue that these are separate phenomena being conflated. A combination of natural bioluminescence, equipment failure, and the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. But the witnesses themselves remain unconvinced, because they all describe the same sensation, the feeling of being watched, of being studied,
as if something beneath the water was just as curious about them as they were about it. And sometimes the encounters don't stop at observation.
Chapter 5. Echoes in the Deep. When strange phenomena occur at sea, science is often called to provide answers. And in the years following the wave of underwater light sightings in the 1970s and 80s, researchers from multiple disciplines attempted to do just that. Oceanographers, marine biologists, geologists, and even military sonar operators turned their attention to the reports, hoping to uncover a rational explanation for what so many witnesses had described. What they found was complicated. Dr. Helena Voss, a marine biologist based in Oslo, became interested in the Norwegian sightings after reading Captain Halderson's account. In 1984, she organized a research expedition to the region where the fjordbris had encountered the luminous disk. Using underwater cameras, sonar mapping, and water sampling equipment, her team spent 2 weeks studying the area. They documented the usual suspects: colonies of bioluminescent plankton, schools of lanternfish, and even a few deep-sea jellyfish capable of producing light. But nothing matched the description given by Halderson and his crew. The scale was wrong, Voss said in a 1986 interview. Bioluminescent organisms emit light in short bursts, usually as a defensive response. They don't create sustained structured glows that last for minutes, and they certainly don't follow ships. Voss did, however, detect something unusual in the water samples. Trace amounts of ionized particles, typically associated with electrical discharges, were present at depths far below where such particles would normally occur. It was, she said, as if something had passed through the water and left a faint electromagnetic signature. Her findings were published in a minor oceanographic journal and largely ignored by the broader scientific community. Around the same time, a team of geologists investigating underwater volcanic activity in the Pacific stumbled upon a related anomaly. Near the site of a reported USO sighting off the coast of Chile, they detected unusual temperature variations on the seabed, localized hotspots that appeared and disappeared over the course of several days. At first, they assumed these were linked to hydrothermal vents, but further analysis revealed no volcanic activity in the area, no fissures in the crust, and no gas emissions. The heat sources were temporary, mobile, and inexplicable. One researcher, speaking off the record, described them as thermal footprints. Perhaps the most compelling evidence came from a declassified U.S. Navy report released in 1997. The document detailed sonar recordings made by a submarine operating in the Caribbean in 1979. During a routine patrol, the sub's sonar detected multiple objects moving at high speed beneath the ocean floor, or what appeared to be beneath it. The objects traveled at velocities far exceeding any known marine life. They executed sharp turns, sudden stops, and rapid ascents that would have been fatal to any biological organism due to pressure changes. The report offered no explanation. It simply noted the anomalies and filed them as unidentified submerged objects. Later analysis by independent researchers suggested the objects might be cavitation bubbles, pockets of air created by underwater landslides or equipment malfunctions. But the sonar operator who recorded the data disagreed. He said, "I've tracked whales, submarines, torpedoes. These moved like none of those. They moved like they knew where they were going." The scientific community remains divided.
Some researchers believe that many of these sightings can be attributed to rare but natural phenomena: deep-sea bioluminescence, methane gas releases, underwater lightning, or seismic activity producing light through a process called triboluminescence. Others, however, are less certain. Dr. Amelia Cross, a physicist specializing in electromagnetic phenomena, has studied dozens of USO reports. In a 2003 paper, she noted the recurring pattern of electrical interference. If these were simply natural light sources, we would not expect them to consistently disrupt electronic systems. The fact that they do suggests the presence of a powerful electromagnetic field, one that is either naturally occurring, in ways we don't yet understand, or artificially generated. She stopped short of speculating on what might generate such a field. But the question hung in the air, unanswered. Because the deeper researchers looked, the less certain they became. The ocean, it seemed, was keeping its secrets, and if there was something down there, something intelligent, something deliberate, it was very good at hiding. Or perhaps it simply didn't care whether we believed or not.
Chapter 6: The Lights That Think. What separates a natural phenomenon from an intelligent one? This is not an easy question to answer. We tend to define intelligence by behavior, the ability to adapt, to learn, to respond to stimuli in complex ways. A river flows downhill. A plant grows towards sunlight. A bird builds a nest. But only one of these, we say, demonstrates intelligence. Yet, the lights beneath the ocean seem to blur that line, because they do more than simply glow. They move with intention. They follow patterns. They respond. Consider the case of the MV Kayomaru, a Japanese research vessel operating in the Philippine Sea in 1989. The ship was conducting a survey of deep-sea ecosystems when around midnight, the crew noticed a series of lights beneath the hull. The lights were arranged in a grid, 6 rows, 6 columns, evenly spaced, and they pulsed in sequence, 1 row at a time, like a wave moving through water. The pattern repeated for several minutes, then shifted. This time, the lights pulsed in a spiral, rotating clockwise. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the lead researcher aboard, recorded the event on video. He also noted that the ship's depth sounder, which used sonar to map the ocean floor, began malfunctioning. Instead of a steady reading, the device registered wildly fluctuating depths as if the seabed were rising and falling in waves. When the lights finally disappeared, the depth sounder returned to normal. Tanaka later submitted his findings to a marine biology conference, where they were met with polite skepticism. The consensus was that he had witnessed a rare schooling behavior in bioluminescent squid, perhaps disturbed by the ship's presence. But Tanaka disagreed. He said, "Squid do not form grids, they do not pulse in synchronized patterns, and they do not interfere with sonar." He believed the lights were communicating, or at least attempting to. This idea that the lights might be a form of communication has been proposed by several researchers over the years. The geometric patterns, the rhythmic pulsing, the coordinated movements, all of these suggest a level of organization that transcends random biological activity. But if they are communicating, the question remains, with whom? In some cases, the lights seem to respond directly to human action. In 1995, a group of divers exploring a reef off the coast of Indonesia encountered a luminous sphere hovering near the ocean floor. The sphere was roughly 2 meters in diameter, pale blue, and perfectly still. One of the divers, a marine biologist named Dr. Sari Wulandari, decided to approach it. She swam slowly, cautiously, her camera rolling. As she got closer, the sphere began to pulse, slowly at first, then faster. When she stopped, the pulsing slowed. When she resumed swimming, it accelerated again. She reached out her hand. The sphere moved backward, maintaining the same distance between them. Wulandari followed. The sphere retreated. And then, without warning, it shot upward, disappearing toward the surface in a blur of light. The entire encounter lasted less than 3 minutes, but Wulandari was left with an overwhelming impression. The sphere had been aware of her. It had reacted to her movements, matched her pace, and ultimately fled when she became too bold. It felt, she later said, like being watched by something that did not want to be touched. Similar accounts exist across the world. Lights that approach divers, then retreat. Lights that follow submarines, mimicking their maneuvers. Lights that circle fishing boats, only to vanish when engines are started. The behavior is too consistent, too deliberate to be dismissed as coincidence. And yet no physical evidence has ever been recovered. No debris, no residue, no biological samples. The lights leave nothing behind except stories, video footage of questionable quality, and witnesses who cannot forget what they saw. Some researchers believe this is evidence of advanced technology, something capable of moving through water without disturbing it, generating light without heat, and evading detection with ease. Others propose a more unsettling possibility, that the lights are not technology at all, but something alive, a form of life so different from our own that we lack the framework to even recognize it as such. Perhaps the ocean harbors intelligences we have never imagined. Perhaps they have always been there, dwelling in the deep, observing us as we pass overhead. And perhaps every now and then they rise to the surface, not to reveal themselves, but simply to remind us how little we truly know.
Chapter 7. Visitors of the Tide. In the summer of 1952, a series of strange events unfolded off the coast of Florida that would later become one of the most cited cases in USO research. It began with a routine Coast Guard patrol. The cutter Spencer was conducting nighttime maneuvers near Key West when sonar detected an object moving beneath the ship. The object was large, roughly the size of a small submarine, and it was descending rapidly. The sonar operator called the captain, who ordered a full scan. What they found was perplexing. The object had stopped at a depth of approximately 500 meters and was now stationary. For 3 hours, the object remained in place, unmoving, while the Spencer circled overhead. Then, just before dawn, it began to rise. Slowly at first, then accelerating, it ascended toward the surface at a speed that should have been impossible for any known vessel. When it breached, witnesses on deck reported seeing a luminous dome-shaped object, perhaps 20 meters in diameter, glowing with a soft orange light. It hovered over the water for several seconds, dripping, silent, and then shot into the sky, disappearing in a matter of moments. The entire crew saw it. The report was logged, and then, quietly, the files were classified. It wasn't until decades later, when the files were partially declassified, that researchers learned what had been kept hidden. The Coast Guard had detected similar objects on multiple occasions, always at night, always in deep water, always exhibiting behavior that defied conventional explanation. The term USO, Unidentified Submerged Object, was coined by researcher Ivan T. Sanderson in the 1970s to describe these phenomena. He proposed that if UFOs existed, it would make sense for them to use Earth's oceans as cover. Water, after all, shields against radar, provides thermal insulation, and offers vast, unexplored spaces where activity could go unnoticed.
It was a bold theory, and it was met with predictable resistance. But over time, more reports emerged, many from military sources. In 1963, during a NATO exercise in the North Atlantic, multiple ships reported sonar contact with a fast-moving object that appeared to be following the fleet. The object traveled at speeds exceeding 150 knots, far faster than any submarine of the era. When destroyers attempted to track it, the object dove to depths beyond the range of their equipment. A similar incident occurred in 1972 during Soviet naval exercises in the Pacific. According to reports later leaked by a Russian officer, submarines detected an unidentified craft that paced them for hours before suddenly accelerating and vanishing. The object reportedly demonstrated impossible maneuvers, including right-angle turns at high speed. In 1980, a U.S. Navy pilot participating in a training mission off the coast of Puerto Rico observed a large glowing object rise from the ocean and hover briefly before accelerating into the clouds. The pilot's gun camera captured the event, but the footage was confiscated and never publicly released. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger pattern, one that suggests the oceans may be host to something far more enigmatic than marine life. Some researchers believe these objects are extraterrestrial in origin, that they represent vehicles or probes from another world, using Earth's oceans as bases of operation or observation posts. The logic is compelling. If an advanced civilization wanted to study Earth without drawing attention, the deep ocean would be the ideal location. Others propose a more terrestrial explanation, that these are secret military craft, experimental submarines, or drones developed by governments and tested in remote waters. The advanced capabilities, high speed, extreme depth, rapid acceleration, might be the result of technology we simply haven't been told about. But there's a third possibility, one that is rarely discussed but impossible to ignore. What if the lights, the objects, the intelligences beneath the waves have always been here? What if they are not visitors, but residents? Native to the ocean, evolved over millennia in ways we cannot fathom, existing in a realm so alien to us that contact is almost impossible. Dr. Anton Markov, a Russian oceanographer and UFO researcher, has spent years exploring this idea. In his book, The Hidden Depths, he argues that the ocean may harbor non-human intelligences that have developed independently of terrestrial life as we know it. We assume that intelligence requires a certain type of biology, but what if consciousness can emerge in forms we have never considered? What if the ocean itself is host to minds that perceive the world in ways entirely foreign to us? It's a radical thought, but it's one that resonates with those who have seen the lights. Because whatever they are, they do not behave like simple organisms. They do not behave like machines. They behave like something in between, something that watches, learns, and perhaps in its own way, wonders about us, just as we wonder about them.
Chapter 8. The Abyss Holds Secrets. The ocean is not one world. It is many. At the surface, where sunlight dances on the waves, life is abundant and familiar. Dolphins leap. Seabirds dive. Fish dart in silver schools. This is the ocean we know, the one we swim in, sail across, and photograph for postcards. But descend a little further, and the world begins to change. At 200 meters, sunlight fades to twilight. Colors disappear, replaced by shades of blue and gray. The pressure increases. The temperature drops. This is the mesopelagic zone, the twilight zone, where strange creatures drift in permanent dusk.
lanternfish with glowing eyes, jellyfish trailing luminous tentacles, squid that flash patterns of light across their skin. Deeper still, at 1,000 meters, darkness becomes absolute. No sunlight penetrates here. The pressure is crushing, over 100 times that at the surface. This is the bathypelagic zone, the midnight realm, and it is home to some of the most alien life forms on Earth. Giant squid with eyes the size of dinner plates, anglerfish with bioluminescent lures dangling from their heads, vampire squid that drift like ghosts, their webbed arms pulsing with red light. And then there is the abyss. Below 4,000 meters, the ocean floor falls away into trenches so deep they could swallow mountains. The Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth, descends to nearly 11 kilometers, deeper than Everest is tall. At the bottom, the pressure is over 1,000 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. The temperature hovers just above freezing. There is no light, no sound, only darkness and weight. For most of human history, we assumed nothing could live there. We were wrong. In the 1970s, scientists discovered hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, underwater geysers that spew superheated water rich in minerals. Around these vents, entire ecosystems thrive in the absence of sunlight. Tube worms, clams, crabs, and bacteria live off the chemicals in the water, creating food chains that do not depend on photosynthesis. Life, it turns out, is far more resilient than we imagined. And if life can exist in such extremes, what else might dwell in the deep? The ocean is vast, covering over 360 million square kilometers, and we have explored less than 5% of it. Our knowledge of the deep sea comes from scattered samples, sonar maps, and occasional dives in submersibles that can only stay down for hours at a time. It is entirely possible, even likely, that there are species, ecosystems, perhaps entire biomes down there that we have never encountered. Things that live at depths we cannot reach. Things that move through the water in ways we do not understand. And perhaps some of those things glow. Dr. Sylvia Reyes, a marine biologist specializing in deep-sea ecosystems, has spent years studying bioluminescence in the ocean. She estimates that over 90% of creatures living below a certain depth are capable of producing light. Bioluminescence is one of the most common traits in the deep sea, she explains. It's used for hunting, communication, camouflage, and reproduction. But we've only scratched the surface of understanding how it works. Race has documented species that emit light in colors we can barely perceive, deep reds and near infrareds. She has observed jellyfish that produce synchronized light shows, flashing in unison across entire swarms. She has even found evidence of what she calls light trails, faint glowing paths left behind by unknown organisms as they move through the water. Every time we go down there, she says, we find something new, something that challenges our assumptions about what life can be. Could the lights reported by fishermen and sailors be related to these deep-sea organisms? Could they be rare, undiscovered species that occasionally venture into shallower waters? It's possible, but it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the geometric patterns, the synchronized movements, the electromagnetic interference, the way the lights seem to react to human presence.
unless, of course, the organisms themselves are more intelligent than we realize. There is a growing body of research suggesting that intelligence is not exclusive to mammals or even vertebrates. Octopuses, for example, demonstrate remarkable problem-solving abilities, tool use, and even playfulness. They have complex nervous systems with neurons distributed throughout their arms, allowing each limb to think semi-independently. Some researchers believe octopuses represent a form of intelligence that evolved entirely separately from our own, a glimpse into what cognition might look like in an alien species. If an octopus can be intelligent, why not something else? Something stranger? Something that lives in the deep, where the rules of biology are different? Perhaps the lights are not technology. Perhaps they are not visitors from another world. Perhaps they are simply life, ancient, strange, and utterly unlike anything we have imagined. And perhaps the ocean has been keeping that secret for a long time.
Chapter 9. The Skeptic's Horizon. For every witness who claims to have seen the lights, there are skeptics ready to offer alternative explanations. And they should be heard, because skepticism at its best is not dismissal, it is rigor. It is the discipline of questioning assumptions, demanding evidence, and refusing to accept extraordinary claims without extraordinary proof. So let us consider the skeptic's case. Dr. Marcus Holt is a marine biologist and vocal critic of USO theories. In his 2008 paper, Bioluminescence and the Myth of the Underwater UFO, he argues that nearly all reported sightings can be attributed to natural phenomena. Bioluminescent organisms are incredibly common in the ocean, Holt writes. And under the right conditions, they can create spectacular displays that might easily be mistaken for something more mysterious. He points to known examples, blooms of dinoflagellates that turn entire bays into glowing lagoons, schools of lanternfish that move in coordinated patterns, flashing their photophores in unison. Even jellyfish, which can drift in massive swarms, pulsing with light as they move. Holt also addresses the geometric patterns reported by witnesses. He suggests that these might be the result of pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful shapes in random data. Just as we see faces in clouds, we might see structure in the chaotic movements of marine life. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, Holt explains. We evolved to see order, even when none exists. That doesn't mean the witnesses are lying. It means they're human. As for the electrical interference, dead engines, spinning compasses, malfunctioning radios, Holt proposes a simpler explanation: equipment failure. Boats break down, especially older fishing vessels operating in harsh conditions. Engines fail, batteries die, compasses corrode. The fact that these failures sometimes coincide with unusual sightings is likely just that: coincidence. Other skeptics point to psychological factors. The ocean at night is a disorienting environment. Fatigue, isolation, and the monotony of long hours at sea can lead to misperceptions. Add in the power of suggestion, stories shared among sailors, local legends, cultural beliefs, and it's easy to see how a simple natural event might be interpreted as something far more mysterious. There's also the issue of documentation. Despite thousands of reported sightings over the decades, the physical evidence is remarkably thin. No objects have been recovered. No biological samples have been collected. No high-resolution footage exists. Most of the evidence consists of eyewitness testimony, which, while valuable, is notoriously unreliable. Memory is fallible. Details shift over time, and when a story is retold, it often grows in the telling. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, says Dr. Linda Kemp, a psychologist who studies perception and memory. And in the case of USOs, we simply don't have that evidence. What we have are stories. Compelling stories, yes, but stories nonetheless. Kemp has studied several witnesses in depth. Conducting interviews and psychological evaluations, she found no evidence of deception or mental illness. The witnesses, she concluded, genuinely believed they had seen something unusual. But belief, she cautions, is not proof. It's entirely possible to misperceive something and be utterly convinced of what you saw. The human brain fills in gaps, constructs narratives, and seeks explanations. That's not a flaw. It's how we make sense of the world. But it does mean we need to be careful about drawing conclusions based solely on perception. These are reasonable objections, and they deserve serious consideration. But here's the problem. They don't account for everything. They don't explain the consistency of the reports. The same details described independently by witnesses in different countries speaking different languages with no contact with one another. They don't explain the electromagnetic anomalies detected by scientific instruments, not just by witnesses, but by researchers conducting independent studies. They don't explain the sonar readings, the declassified military reports, the footage captured by trained pilots and naval officers, and they don't explain why so many witnesses, fishermen who have spent their entire lives on the water, insist that what they saw was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. Dr. Holt and his colleagues are right to demand evidence, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The ocean is vast, it is deep, and it is poorly understood. To assume we know everything that exists within it, to dismiss the possibility of the unknown simply because we have not captured it, measured it, or explained it, is, in its own way, a failure of imagination. Science thrives on mystery, on questions that resist easy answers, on phenomena that challenge our assumptions and force us to look deeper. And the lights beneath the ocean are exactly that kind of mystery. So perhaps the most honest answer is this: we don't know. Not yet. But the question remains open, and the deep, as always, keeps its secrets.
Chapter 10. The Memory of the Sea. There is a story told by fishermen in the Philippines, passed down through generations, about a spirit that lives beneath the waves. They call it the Dewata ng Dagat, the guardian of the sea. It is said to appear as a light, soft and pale, that rises from the depths when the ocean is calm. Some say it is a blessing, a sign of safe passage. Others say it is a warning, a reminder that the sea is not ours to command. The story is old, older than colonialism, older than Christianity. It is woven into the fabric of coastal life, told to children at bedtime, whispered among sailors when the wind dies and the water turns still. And it is not unique to the Philippines. In Norway, fishermen speak of the havgal, the ocean singer, a creature of light and sound that dwells in the fjords, rising on moonless nights to dance beneath the boats. Those who see it, it is said, are blessed with good fortune. Those who try to capture it will lose everything. In Japan, There are tales of the umibozu, a shadowy figure that emerges from the sea, sometimes glowing with a ghostly light. It is neither friend nor foe, but something in between, a presence, a watcher. In Chile, in Indonesia, in Ireland, in Iceland, wherever humans have lived by the sea, there are stories of lights beneath the water, spirits, ghosts, gods, guardians. The names change, the details shift, but the essence remains the same. The ocean is alive, and it watches us. These stories predate modern science. They predate UFO sightings and sonar and deep-sea exploration. They are part of the human relationship with the ocean, a relationship built on awe, fear, and respect. And perhaps they contain a truth we have forgotten. Not a literal truth necessarily, but a deeper one. That the ocean is not ours, that it is vast and unknowable, that there are things within it we will never fully understand. For most of human history, the sea was a boundary, a place where the known world ended and the unknown began. Sailors who ventured too far risked falling off the edge of the world, or so they believed. Maps were marked with warnings. Here be dragons. And while we no longer believe in dragons, the impulse remains, the sense that there are places we should not go, things we should not disturb. The deep ocean is one of those places. It is hostile to us. We cannot breathe there. We cannot survive the pressure, the cold, the darkness. We can visit briefly in submersibles and diving suits, but we cannot stay. It is in every sense an alien environment. And yet, it is part of our world. It covers most of our planet. It regulates our climate, produces much of our oxygen, and sustains ecosystems that feed billions of people. We depend on the ocean, but we do not understand it. Perhaps that is why the stories persist, why fishermen still speak of lights beneath the boats, why sailors still feel watched when the water grows too still. Because the ocean is the last great mystery on Earth, the final frontier, not in space, but here, beneath our feet. And mysteries, by their nature, resist explanation. Dr. Amara Okafor, a cultural anthropologist who studies maritime folklore, has spent years collecting these stories from coastal communities around the world. She believes they serve an important function, not as literal accounts of events, but as expressions of something deeper. Folklore is how we make sense of the unknown, she explains. When we encounter something we can't explain, we create stories to contain it, to give it shape, to make it less frightening. But Okafor also believes that these stories may preserve real knowledge, knowledge passed down orally, long before written records existed. Just because something is described in mythic terms doesn't mean it didn't happen, she says. Ancient peoples were keen observers of the natural world. They noticed patterns, anomalies, strange occurrences, and they encoded that information in stories. Could the tales of glowing spirits and underwater guardians be based on real encounters with bioluminescent organisms, with rare geological phenomena, with something else entirely? It's possible. But what strikes Okafor most is the consistency of the emotion these stories evoke. Fear, yes,
but also reverence, a sense that the ocean is sacred, that it deserves respect. And perhaps that is the lesson the lights are teaching us, if we are willing to listen. That the ocean is not a resource to be exploited, not a frontier to be conquered, but a living system, vast and complex, that we are only beginning to understand. And that somewhere, in the depths, there may be things watching us, wondering about us, waiting, just as we wonder about them.
Chapter 11. What lies beneath? To witness the unexplained is to carry a weight that others cannot see. Ernesto Cabrera knows this well. In the years following that night off the coast of Cebu, he continued to fish the same waters. He returned to the same stretch of ocean where the lights had appeared, hoping, perhaps, to see them again, to confirm what he knew in his heart to be true. But the lights never returned. And over time, the story became something else. A tale he told at family gatherings, a curiosity that neighbors asked about when they saw him at the market. A moment that, in the retelling, began to feel distant, as if it had happened to someone else. But the feeling never left. "I know what I saw," Ernesto said in a 2005 interview conducted by a researcher documenting USO encounters. "I know it was real, but after a while you stop talking about it because people look at you differently. They smile, they nod, but you can see it in their eyes. They think you're confused or lying or crazy." He paused. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am crazy. But Miguel saw it too, and Ruben, and Tomas. We all saw the same thing. So if I'm crazy, then we all are." This is the burden of the witness, to know something that cannot be proven, to have seen something that defies explanation, and to live with the knowledge that in the eyes of the world, it may as well not have happened. Dr. Alan Cross, a psychologist specializing in trauma and extraordinary experiences, has worked with dozens of individuals who have witnessed unexplained phenomena, not just USOs, but UFOs, cryptids, and other anomalies. He describes a common pattern among them. They're often isolated, not because they want to be, but because their experience sets them apart. They've crossed a threshold that most people haven't. And once you've crossed that threshold, it's hard to go back. The isolation is compounded by skepticism, not just from strangers, but from friends and family. Many witnesses report being mocked, dismissed, or accused of fabrication. Some lose jobs. Some are ostracized from their communities. And yet most refuse to recant. Because they know what they saw, and no amount of skepticism can erase that knowledge. But there's another side to this burden, one that is harder to articulate. For many witnesses, the encounter is transformative. It shatters their understanding of the world. It forces them to reconsider what is possible, what is real, and what remains hidden just beyond the edge of perception. Captain Bjorn Holderson, the Norwegian fisherman who saw the luminous disk in 1966, described it this way. "Before that night, the ocean was just water, a place to work, a source of income. But after, it became something else, a mystery, a question I could never answer." He spent the rest of his life at sea, always watching, always wondering. He never saw the lights again, but he never stopped looking. "It changes you," he said, "knowing that there are things out there we don't understand.
It makes the world feel bigger and smaller somehow at the same time. This sense of dislocation, of being caught between the known and the unknown, is perhaps the most profound effect of the encounter. Because to see the lights is to be reminded of how little we truly know, how fragile our certainties are, how thin the boundary is between the familiar and the strange. And for some, that realization is terrifying. But for others, it is liberating. Dr. Sari Wudanlari, the marine biologist who encountered the luminous sphere in Indonesia, describes the experience as a gift. It reminded me why I became a scientist, not to explain everything, but to explore, to ask questions, to remain curious. She has dedicated her career to studying the deep ocean, driven by the memory of that brief, strange encounter. She has yet to see the lights again, but she keeps searching. Because the ocean is full of wonders, and I don't need to understand them all. I just need to know they're there. This, perhaps, is the true legacy of the lights. Not proof, not answers, but something more elusive. Wonder. The recognition that the world is stranger, deeper, and more mysterious than we imagined. That there are still frontiers to explore, questions to ask, and stories to tell. And that sometimes the most important thing is not to solve the mystery, but to allow it to exist. To hold it gently, to respect it, to let it remind us that we are not the only ones watching, that somewhere, beneath the waves, something else is watching too.
Chapter 12. The Last Light. It is late now. The ocean is calm, as it was that night all those years ago. The stars are out, scattered across the black sky like salt spilled on silk. Somewhere, far from shore, the small boat drifts in the dark. Maybe it is Ernesto's boat. Maybe it belongs to someone else. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. The engine is off, the nets are down, and the water is still. And beneath the boat, something begins to glow. It starts faint, a pale shimmer, barely visible, a trick of the light perhaps, or a reflection of the moon, but then it grows brighter, and the fishermen lean over the edge, peering into the deep. They see shapes, spheres, patterns, moving slowly, deliberately, with a rhythm that feels almost like breath. One of them reaches for the radio, another crosses himself, a third simply stares, unable to look away. And the lights continue their dance, silent and strange, as they have for centuries, as they may for centuries more. Because the ocean keeps its secrets, and the lights, whatever they are, wherever they come from, are part of that secret. They do not offer answers, they do not reveal themselves, they simply appear, linger for a moment, and then vanish back into the depths, leaving only questions in their wake. And perhaps that is enough. Because we do not need to understand everything. We do not need to capture every mystery, dissect every wonder, explain every anomaly. Sometimes it is enough to witness, to watch, to hold the moment in our minds and let it live there unanswered and whole. The ocean has always been this way, a place of beauty and terror, of life and death, of light and shadow. It does not care whether we believe in it. It does not ask for our understanding. It simply is. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface, something glows, something moves, something watches.
Maybe it is alive, maybe it is intelligent, maybe it has been there all along, waiting for us to notice. Or maybe it is nothing at all. A reflection, a dream, a story told by tired men on dark nights, passed down through generations until it becomes myth. But the fishermen know better. They have seen the lights, felt the weight of the unknown pressing against their boats, stood at the edge of the world and glimpsed something beyond it. And they carry that knowledge with them, always. Not as proof, not as certainty, but as a reminder that the world is vast, that mystery still exists, and that sometimes, in the quiet moments, when the water is still and the stars are bright, the deep reaches up to touch us, to show us something, to ask a question, to remind us that we are not alone. The boat rocks gently, the lights fade, and the ocean returns to darkness. But the story does not end. It never does. Because somewhere, tonight, another fisherman will cast his nets into the black water, another sailor will drift beneath a moonless sky, another witness will see something they cannot explain. And they will tell the story, and the story will spread, and the mystery will continue, as it always has, as it always will, until the ocean finally decides to speak, or until we learn to listen.